So I was talking about Pandora's box, and it was GLP-1s. Well, they're trying to get as much money as they can right now, so they're over-scripting the drug. This is going to reduce down the risk of disease long-term by so much if applied properly. And I said that this from day one. I was like, they're going to over-script these drugs. People are not going to eat, and you're going to see all these different issues coming up.
And we're back, picking up our conversation with David DeMesquita, in short, a leading specialist in human performance optimization. To recap, we're diving into the true cost of quick fixes and performance enhancers when it comes to our bodies, whether competing in bodybuilding or chasing dramatic, rapid weight loss. The real question is it worth it shortening your life for pride and aesthetics? And is there a balance? How can we achieve it? Dave, let's pick things back up.
I want to talk about blood work because there's way more conversation these days than there used to be about blood work. So 15 years ago, when I was in the space very heavily, you would hear blood work get brought up, but it was almost like taboo. Like we didn't want to get it done because we didn't want to know. Now, with the right coach, it is a must. And then there's this idea of a normal panel. And then you and I both know what does normal actually mean, because it's skewed greatly. And what does normal potentially not reveal?
Let's talk about what a blood panel is if you walk into your primary care physician. It's to make sure you're breathing, literally. That's a simply...
You can survive.
You can survive, right? They'll run some LDL. They're not even running an APOB, which we'll get into in a second. All right, like you're at risk for diabetes. Like that's all they're or you're at risk for, here's a statin, right? Your LDL is high. Like because they don't have control over your diet, so they have to have a drug to do something, right? Now there's way better drugs than statins like ezetimibe, but that's a story for another time. Getting into the meat and potatoes of it is then the way the medical system is set up is they can only run certain amount of labs before insurance won't cover it anymore. So there's a triage process you have to go through in the medical space. So this is how you work the medical space. You can go to your primary, you can run some labs. You can get a referral to a specialist. I highly recommend, especially even women, urologists. They tend to be more forward thinking as far as studies coming out and running labs and stuff like that. They know how the system works. You can get a lab panel run from them for your hormones and some other markers that are harder to get run. After you run that, then if they run a certain lab panel, they're like, oh, I need to run another lab panel. Then they can run another lab panel that's covered by insurance. Then after that lab panel, so there's like a 4-step process of just getting a decent amount of labs run. Now, the issue is you don't get a snapshot in time. Like it's all like, what do you look like at that moment in time? And for instance, thyroid's a big one, right? When you get your thyroid panel run, if you ask for a doctor for a thyroid panel, usually you only get your TSH levels run because that's how they diagnose like hypothyroidism or potentially an indicator for Hashimoto's, rarely Graves' disease, but Graves' disease it could technically pick up on. For what you want to see on a thyroid panel is you want to see a TSH, which is the signaling from the brain to produce thyroid hormone. Free, not total, but free T4 tells you exactly how much T4 you have, which is inactive thyroid hormone. And then you have free T3, which is your active metabolism, as people would call it, but it's your active thyroid hormone. Your free T3 is what I want to know. And good luck getting a doctor to run that unless if you have Hashimoto's already diagnosed at that point in time. When in the negative feedback loop happens from free T3, not free T4. So if you have high free T3, it starts turning down the brain saying, hey, I don't need as much thyroid hormone anymore. So it'll start pulling down that TSH level. That's how, so if you have low T3, low free T3, then the TSH level will start to ramp up. And that's like how you can pick up on something like Hashimoto's and like hypothyroidism, and then you'd run TPO antibodies, which is an antibody read for it. So what I like to get run as far as labs go from a progressive standpoint is you want a full metabolic panel. So that's going to be like LDL. It's going to be HA1C. So you see your blood glucose to see if you're getting into pre-diabetic ranges or anything like that, which a lot of Americans are, not only from dietary, but from the high cortisol levels and high stress levels that we induce every single day, like just driving and having to see bad drivers is stressful enough. So thank God I don't have to drive into work anymore. That's like one thing that I do like to get run. More forward thinking. So for instance, like people get ALT and AST run for their liver. Well, I like a GGT. GGT is a more accurate read for especially like people in the athletic space. Instead of just getting GFR read for your, which is the filtration rate of your kidneys, because it's only like a snapshot in time of how it's filtering. It's not a total clearance rate. You can get a cystatin C. If you're wanting to look at heart disease risk, it's a LDL plus an APOB equals cardiovascular risk at that moment in time. If you want to know, for instance, potential clot risk, you can get a homocysteine. Factor V gene is something I think that a lot of people should read at some point in time, which is a genetic marker, which increases your risk for kicking up clots. Especially if you're running steroids, like clot risk goes up because it, in quotes, it makes the blood stickier, so to say. So baby aspirin a day is like one of the best things that people can be doing.
Yeah. So I would say there's probably a lot of things you said right there that most people are like, WTF, I'm lost. I don't know what that means, which is fair, because I don't know how you necessarily elementary that down, for lack of a better term. But what I would say is this. So what I gather from that, if I'm new to this space, is, wait a minute. If I go to my doctor and I get my blood work done, all they're doing is making sure that I'm normal, which means that I'm surviving. I also then have to jump through all other hoops to figure out these things. So if someone's hearing that, they're like, fuck, I don't want to jump through all these hoops. Is there a place that they can go and get a full blood panel workup? Like, how does that work?
That's a great that's the right question. So one, by the time you're done seeing the doctors, you're spending thousands of dollars out of pocket anyway. So you spent more than the labs would cost. You try to pay out of pocket, by the way, with insurance, you spend probably $2,000 on a full comprehensive lab panel. If you run it privately, you're looking at a really expensive lab panel, about $300. And you can run those online. Like there's a bunch of places online right now. I mean, I could shameless plug, but I'm not going to. I'm not trying to sales pitch anyone.
No, I think it's fair, because I've used them.
Okay, so like Sage Bio, one of my friends owns it, and it's the cheapest lab corp prices in the US. Different facilities use different places. So it's either Quest or LabCorp are the two major ones in the US that they're going to use. And this is pretty cool. So like at least LabCorp, they use something called Get Labs. You can have a nurse come to your house and run your lab. So you can wake up at the butt crack of dawn, be fasted, not have to wait in a waiting room of people waiting to get their lab panels run or pee in a cup for a drug test for an employer or something like that. So I actually use Get Labs all the time to like have a nurse come out to run my labs actually.
Yeah, no, good stuff. And so let's take this a little bit further. So there are normal ranges. So, and you would know this better than I don't want to paraphrase anything. What is a normal range for testosterone in a male?
Normal range for testosterone in a male is 300 nanogram per deciliter up to 900 nanogram per deciliter. Now, this is where things get a little bit skewed, is we know that the human body can probably handle up to 1200 nanogram, 1100, this is kind of a dangerous statement, 1100 nanogram per deciliter up to potentially 1200 nanogram per deciliter when you look at least historically how the bone structure changed over time. We used to have thicker bone structure. Through evolution, that changed because we're not hunters and gatherers like we used to be.
We're sitting in office chairs.
So yeah, exactly. We're sitting in office chairs. So testosterone actually increases bone density. That has changed. So from a physiological standpoint, we might actually be able to handle more than slightly those reference ranges, because the reference ranges are based off of averages of the populace of humans.
To me, there's something concerning about that, though. So what I would hear then, okay, well, you're normal. So I'll give you an example in my own life. So I was afraid to get my blood panel about a year or so ago, because the reality was I've had, cancer that I've had to deal with. I've had family members die from it. I know I misused anabolic steroids for, better part of a decade. And so I'm also a stubborn man. And so is my previous coach, Nick, who's been on the podcast a couple of times, kept saying, go do this. I finally said, bro, I'm afraid to find out that I'm dying. And he said, well, at least if we know, we can fix it. So I get my blood panel back. I see everything. Pretty smart guy. I go, everything's normal. I'm like a fucking cockroach. You can't kill me. His response was, but you're not optimal. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And so in testosterone, I was fine. But one of the interesting things was like fasted blood glucose. hey, we're sub 100, we're good. And I'm like, oh, I'm at like 84. I'm fine. And he's like, we need to get you in the 70s so that you're, metabolizing and utilizing carbohydrates better and all these other things. But most doctors don't talk to you about optimal. They're just quick to write a prescription because you said they can't control your diet, which is true. But I think so many folks, especially if you're a business owner, you're looking how to optimize all these areas of your life for an athlete. Normal is not necessarily good.
Normal is not good for a lot of people. For instance, you can be at 300 nanogram per deciliter, and I've seen women on TRT, which they should not be up there, but I've seen women on TRT that respond poorly to it up there. I've seen clinics doing some crazy stuff.
Oh, I know one by my house.
It's like really bad. Some of these people need to go to jail. Right? I'm just bluntly saying that. So permanently ruining women.
We'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah. So, optimal is what is optimal for them. So this is also where the discrepancy comes in between medical and functional. When you doctors get demonized because you walk in there, you tell them your symptoms, they give you a pill, they walk you out the door. Why do they give you a pill? Because they know that pill can fix that symptom probably. And if it doesn't, then you're coming back in and we're doing some further testing. Maybe that's the way that the insurance system works for what they're specialized in. Maybe they have to do that.
Well, and what do they say? There's no money in the cure.
So
there's a lot of money in people staying sick.
And the issue is they accidentally opened Pandora's box and made people healthy. And I'll explain that too and further on this podcast, which is pretty cool. They opened up Pandora's box. They made a mistake. So big mistake. So symptoms matter just as much as data. I've seen people that are in actually performance optimal ranges for thyroid, so their metabolism, and yet their calories are so low and they're still getting fat, right? So something else is going on. That might require another test. That might be gastrointestinal mapping. That might be eventually gene testing. It might be a scan of an organ, right? Especially men need to get scans for the carotid artery at some point in time, checking for plaque buildup. Plaque buildup, technically, we can see risk in labs, but we can't see the actual scan of what you already have built up. So scans do matter. And making sure that someone is feeling and performing well matters a lot. And that's the cool thing about drugs is drugs just work. But Eastern medicine works too. And if you fix lab markers and you get them to optimal ranges, even without touching drugs, by the way, you literally just fix the lab markers. Someone's performance goes up in every area of their life. For instance, maybe the cholesterol's high and they're feeling kind of sluggish. You fix their cholesterol. Glucose, actually, let's do glucose because that was yours. So fixing glucose levels is probably one of the root causations for a lot of disease that we see because glucose, when you have too much floating around in your blood system, it breaks down tissue. The best example of this is type 1 diabetics will get something called gangrene. It will kill the tissue, the blood glucose over time. For instance, limbs are very common, so fingers and toes, and they will literally have to get those organ, whatever that limb is, cut off, and they can die from it. A lot of diabetics actually will die from that if they don't take care of themselves. And that tells you to an extreme condition, but when you optimize it and you're shuttling nutrients properly, well, that's how you start putting on muscle tissue. That's how performance goes up. That's how cognitive focus goes up. People are talking about creatine being so good for your brain right now. It's because of ATP production or energy in your brain. So making sure that you don't break down tissue over time, which glucose will break down brain. Kind of like, if you think about it, it's kind of like a sand eroding away, or wind eroding away on a cliffside. It keeps eroding away over time. That's like your blood glucose going through your veins. And it's like hitting. And then what happens is you break down the artery walls and then you start building up plaque in that area. So actually it's glucose that starts that process, not technically the cholesterol.
Yeah. Interesting stuff, man. What about this idea of inflammation, which is talked about more and more? Can it accumulate, and you've probably alluded to this already, but can inflammation accumulate quietly where labs seem just fine?
Especially non-optimal ranges, yes. We were talking about that. But inflammation, yes. Inflammation can build quietly over time. It doesn't always get picked up on labs. The biggest one that I see, now it's kind of cool when you pick up on labs, for instance, gastrointestinal system, right? You can have bacterial overgrowth and your labs come back perfect. Now, there are some indicators that can pick up on bacterial overgrowth, but not everyone's going to flare that up. So when I see people resistant to fat loss and their labs are looking really good, I'm like, okay, well, we're seeing inflammation in your body. Like physically, like I see fluid retention through your body, or I see it in your face. Your face is red. You're having a histamine response, right? So your histamine response, now what's not showing on these labs is your heart rate. Histamines will drive up your heart rate. So that's keeping you in a sympathetic state, which is a high stress state, a fight or flight state, just because your gut might be in a bad spot, and then it's causing your histamines to go up. Allergic reactions. Think about histamines. High histamines, allergic reaction. You can't breathe. Drives up your heart rate. Anxiety, things like that. We pick up on that in actual biofeedback and symptoms. And that's why symptoms are so important, because it can tell you, okay, you have these symptoms. Maybe we should test this. Now you have to have the knowledgeable enough person around you to say, we should test this. And that's where the harder thing becomes.
Yeah. How much damage can happen to tissue levels before those numbers even move? Because if I were a betting man, I would say a lot of these bodybuilders that we've seen die recently got their blood panels done,
but no scans. No scans. I bet you almost no scans, because also they ignored symptoms. You don't just die. I hate to say it loud. You can. But for instance, pulmonary embolism, right? You take an x-ray of your lungs. You'll pick up on your clots building up in your lungs through the arc, right? That's something that I have to get done because I'm a heterozygous, so I'm a plus minus for factor V, and I have Graves' disease, meaning I'm at even higher risk for clots. So I need to get x-rays of my lungs. That's a scan that matters. Enlarged heart. Go get scans done. Like scanning your organs matters. And yes, I think the worst thing, and this is what bodybuilders don't want to do, is they don't want to see, they're scared. Just like what you said. I was scared at one point in time too. I was lucky I was young, to be honest. My labs also were always bulletproof. I was always scared to run labs during my cycles. And interesting thing is even when I ran cycles without the proper things deployed, so a lot of it was deployed, but not all of it that we know today. My labs always came back bulletproof. In fact, I was lucky because my blood pressure actually would usually run low. Running steroids would put me into normal ranges, into the 120s. And usually before that, I'd be like in the 110s or sometimes below 110 over like a 50. So it actually bring all my blood pressure into good ranges.
So it's fair to say that labs can also bring a false confidence.
Labs can definitely bring false confidence, but you shouldn't be scared to run labs, because that's like the least you should be doing is running labs. And especially you should also know I can predict to an extent a gear and peptide response to an extent, or how to optimize the body based off of where the lab markers are. I can also do a predictive analysis off of where they're going to go. And then running labs while on cycle tells you what you're at genetic risk for long-term, because you will see the cholesterol skew to an extent. Maybe not if you're really good with your deploying of Eastern medicine and Western medicine.
Yeah. Let's lean into gut health and root causes a little bit. How often do you see that low testosterone is actually a symptom and not a cause of what's going on in men or women?
Low testosterone is a symptom from poor gut health. Yeah. I think the more apparent one that you can pick up on labs sometimes, which I'd rather talk about, is high estrogen. Okay. Estrogen dominance with women. I mean, technically it would be high estrogen for men, and they're pounding AIs and you don't see it coming down.
AIs.
AIs, aromatase inhibitors. So it blocks estrogen from being produced essentially at a systemic level. So it'll pull down your estrogen levels.
Which is something that men would take alongside TRT.
Yes, which they shouldn't be if they're doing TRT properly. There's like almost no cases where if TRT is being deployed properly and injection frequency that they would need it, because estrogen is really good for cardiovascular health. It's good for mental health. It's good for hair, skin, nails, and also testosterone to estrogen ratio usually equals these symptoms such as hair loss becomes more prevalent when you have low estrogen and high testosterone. Yeah, I'm with you. Slowly getting there. Turkey trip maybe in my future. So, or just hats, right, or shave.
That doesn't make sense to everybody else, but yeah, you can go get hair transplant for $5-6 grand.
Well, if you have like decent head of hair like myself, it'd probably be like $2 grand, $2.5 grand, $5 grand for like if you're completely bald and you want a full head of hair again. It's pretty crazy, pretty cheap. I think the flight time and then just the time of getting over there is the bigger expense. Yeah, so gut health, estrogen. So there's an enzyme in the gut called beta glucuronidase. And there's also certain bacteria that help to break down actually estrogen. And if you don't break it down, you can recirculate it through your system. So you poop out like 50% of your estrogen. So your liver tries to detox it, then it goes into the intestines, and then you basically like have to poop it out. But if you're recirculating that estrogen, then it can keep going higher and higher. It's been really interesting, the cross interactions that I've seen with people taking certain drugs to combat symptoms or lab markers, and certain things not changing because their gut's so bad.
So if the gut is so dysfunctional for somebody, can any protocol truly optimize them?
Without fixing their gut? Yeah. You can do things to reduce down symptoms, and you can do things to rebalance the gut to an extent without having drastic side effects to make people get by. For instance, if you put someone on a low FODMAP diet, which a low FODMAP diet is essentially a diet that does not grow a lot of bacteria, in short. So you're growing less bacteria, so therefore you're causing less gas buildup in the intestines, so they don't feel as bloated. They might be pooping more frequently now. So instead of what would probably be diagnosed as like an IBS-C, IBS constipation, you could probably reduce down those symptoms by just switching someone to a low FODMAP diet. Now, the issue with a low FODMAP diet long-term is you build up something called biofilm. Biofilm is essentially, just think about a mucosal membrane around these bacteria that really protect them. And that makes it harder to actually kill them off. So usually the issue with going to a gastro is they're going to give you antibiotics. Now, I'm a fan of antibiotics, by the way, for bacterial overgrowth or SIBO. The downside is someone is doing a bad diet just to make sure that they can feel kind of decent. If they build up a bunch of biofilm, taking a tool to break down that biofilm is important. So I call it like a prime. I prime the bacteria for kill off, and then you blast the bacteria, you kill it, and then you try to repopulate on the back end of it. And the repopulation phase, the harder you kill, the harder it is to repopulate. I have found a technique where I'm pretty fast and effective at it, and I'm not opposed to using antibiotics at all. I obviously do it under, like, I have doctor scripted and doctor supervision, but needless to say, I've gotten pretty darn good at using antibiotics, antibiotic protocols, rather than just the only functional approach. It's the issue that I run into in the functional space with gastrointestinal systems is it's like, all right, you've got SIBO, and I've also seen SIBO misdiagnosed, which I don't know how you do it, but needless to say, like, you've got SIBO. They run you through a 12-week kill phase. You're not better, you're worse. They try to repopulate your gut, you're still worse. Then they try to go into another kill phase. Then you go into another kill phase, then another kill phase. The next thing you know, you're $10,000 deep and you're 2 years down the road, and you feel helpless. And you've been taking 70 to 100 pills a day, and you're so burnt out that you're just like, I'm done with this. Next thing you know, you go into a gastro office, they give you antibiotics and you're better. Well, you technically were primed for those last 2 years, but you also burned $10,000 down the tubes, in my personal opinion. Yeah. So I'd rather hit some things hard really fast sometimes and then roll out of it, repopulate, see if you can catch it. And then if needed, roll into either a natural kill phase or roll into a repopulation phase. But I always try to repopulate as quickly and as hard as I can, catch it. And if they're feeling good. If not, sometimes you retest, sometimes you don't. The issue with GI mapping is it's a $450 test, a $500 test. I will say one thing that's really good about GI mapping, though, is I'm surprised they don't run this more commonly, is it runs for zonulin, which tests for leaky gut. You tend to see depression pretty commonly with people with leaky gut.
I'll preface the question with this. David's not a doctor. No. However, you've seen a lot of things. Is it fair to say that so much of the body and how we respond to everything starts at the gut level?
Yes, it's very fair to say that. In fact, it's so fair to say that we know that a child that goes through the birth canal rather than a C-section has different levels of bacteria for indefinitely for the rest of their life. It impacts their microbiome for literally the rest of their life. And that's how impactful it is.
Something I heard a long time ago, and I don't know if this is real or not, and it's created maybe a bias in myself. I am hugely opposed to taking any type of antibiotic or medicine unless like I have to. Like if there's no other option, because I heard a long time ago when I was in school that a lot of antibiotics can create havoc on the gut and basically remove any and all bacteria, which then it does have to rebuild. And if you're one of those kids, and you probably saw this growing up with, your friends and stuff, there was always that kid that was always sick and always taking antibiotics. Like I like taking aspirin because even though it doesn't do that, it's created again this bias in me. But with antibiotics, is there that yes, it's fixing one thing, but it also can be hurting the gut?
Well, let's shake things up with this comment and this question.
Yeah.
So antibiotics are great. That's where I'm going to start off. Why are antibiotics great? They're targeted to kill certain, well, some are very like open-ended, right? They're targeted towards certain strains of bacteria. That's good and bad, but they're strains, right? So if you understand what strains you're trying to kill, there's actually something called a Stafford guide, which is, Stanford. So it's a guide that tells you if you run certain antibiotics, you genetically, or you'll be resistant against certain antibiotics on the next run that you do. And that's the guide that you're supposed to go by. That's what doctors are at least supposed to use, and usually what they use. So what I like about antibiotics is that they're so hard and heavy hitting that if you have a strain that's high, you want to blast that thing down, you can blast it down. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to kill off good and bad. You're going to kill off certain strains, though. So you can repopulate those strains if you know what you're doing. Now, the downside with taking the natural route, so antibiotic further, pros and cons, double-edged sword. You kill off bad, you kill off good. Doesn't matter. Now, functional health, let's give you a oil of oregano. Well, you're killing off good and bad, but you're killing off a lot of good and a lot of bad. It's the same exact thing. In the functional space, it doesn't go as fast. So it goes over a longer period of time. So if you're lowering your good bacteria for extended periods of time, is that actually worse than trying to kill off really hard and heavy in a short period of time? Also, does the person feel better, right? If they're feeling worse and worse, sometimes I have a 95% success rate of doing only natural. But those 5% of times, and the other times that I've decided that I think antibiotics are a better approach, made me feel very different about antibiotics. If you know what you're doing, you have to repopulate the gut.
Well, and that brings me to the second part. A lot of times it's about the antibiotic to get rid of whatever's going on, but there's not a lot of conversation, at least in my experience, of very limited times going to the doctor of, and this is what we need to do afterwards. It's just take this all the way through, you'll feel better.
And that's the issue where it lies. There's also not a priming phase too. Even if you're taking antibiotics, there's all this Eastern medicine, these natural supplements that should be taken around it to make those antibiotics more effective for killing it. Like I said, talked about biofilm, breaking down the biofilms. Also making sure that you're not just bloating from it. Those symptoms still matter. Now, doctors will ask those symptoms. So for instance, if you get severely constipated because you're kicking up a bunch of gas during that kill phase, maybe taking some magnesium to make sure that you're loosening the stool to keep things moving along, or even Gas X, right? Like I usually don't even have that conversation, right? Like that's a great tool. And the back end of it, the more important thing is not just taking probiotics. So I like pre, pro, and postbiotics, plus things to make sure that the intestinal lining didn't break down and cause leaky gut. So no matter what, kind of on the back end, I think that's important. And the diet is really what matters. So if you go to a low FODMAP diet during that kill phase, which a doctor won't care because antibiotics are so strong, it doesn't matter if you're on a high FODMAP diet or not. It's just going to kill that strain off, right? Or it's multiple strains, not just going to be a singular strain. Then the diet on the back end, though, helps to repopulate that gut. Think of it as like if you built a house, a brick house, and you didn't have like any slab to like build on, right? And it's going to crumble. It's going to fall apart because nothing's holding, right? There's nothing gummy there. There's no cement there. And that's how the gut's repopulated is you need your prebiotics. That's predominantly going to be coming from your vegetables. Now, what foods do you need? For instance, asparagus, super high in prebiotics. So it grows bacteria very effectively. Now, you don't want that when you have bacterial overgrowth because it's going to make you super uncomfortable. Fermented foods, the pre and probiotics are in those. But again, can someone tolerate that or not? Is it causing histamine responses? Those are the reasons why the back end of it is so important. And people call it like a relapse. I wouldn't call it a relapse, but you can get bacterial overgrowth again if you do not repopulate the gut properly on that back end.
Yeah, good stuff, man. A thought that I had though with this, though, is and I'll give an analogy first, so this may make sense to some other people. So I know in the space that I'm in, which is marketing, that we can have folks go to school and get their master's or a double master's, whatever it may be. And when they actually get entered in the world of marketing that I live in, a lot of what they learned isn't necessarily relevant anymore. Is it fair to say, and a lot of that has to do with curriculum and how fast things change. And again, you're not a doctor, you don't have a PhD. I haven't been through the program, but would you guesstimate that there's not a lot of that education that happens inside of Western medicine at this point? It's more about let's just solve the problem immediately.
From the dietary standpoint, yes, that's still one of the major downsides. But I believe there is one type of doctorate program where they do learn a little bit about diets. It's like an extra semester they have to take, which most doctors probably don't want to even pay for that anyways. Really, and interestingly enough, is you can actually get food covered by insurance if you get your doctor to script it to you. Pro tip.
And I would say too, to be fair with what most doctors are up against, it's this idea that people generally aren't going to change.
So that's a lot of what it is, and that's why drugs are so effective and they're so needed. Gastrointestinal space in particular has come a very long way within the last decade, I'd say. The issue is you have to think about medical as binary a lot of the times, like zeros and ones in coding, right? It's like yes or no. If it's yes, do this. If it's no, it's a no, right? It's kind of like peptides right now. There's a lot of like, we don't know. So the answer is no for right now. Maybe the answer becomes yes, right? One was just FDA legalized in November. So that was like the first peptide in a long time I can remember actually getting FDA legalized. So if it's a yes, dang, that thing actually works, right? We have enough human literature with conviction that it does work. So in the gastrointestinal space, yes, it's targeted certain strains. They've seen what's going on. There's a lot of really good medications for irritable bowel diseases, not IBS, but irritable bowel diseases. And that area is getting better. But I still think there's certain marks that are being missed in the space. Will it ever come around to acknowledging, for instance, GI mapping? Gastrointestinal mapping is a stool sample. There are flaws to gastrointestinal mapping, just like a lot of other things. There are flaws to the testing because you're only looking at a small subset of that tube, right, of your intestines of stool. And then you have like feet left over of stool. Now, what we do know is when we treat using it, that it is pretty accurate in getting the symptoms resolved a lot of the times. And it's also not a plus or minus, right? Like the breath test is a yes or no, whether you have methane or hydrogen bacteria essentially is high. Whereas this test for the different strains, and it also tells you the number of bacteria that it's picking up on in that stool sample, which is pretty cool because then you can say, hey, like it's really not that bad. Like if I treat this or if I pull down this strain, like you're going to kill off good bacteria as well, might not even be worth it to pull it down. This might be actually your balance, by the way. And I think that's the issue in the functional space is they overtreat. So there's like a clash that's been happening for a long time. I've seen some really weird stuff in the functional space though lately.
No, it's definitely come a long way. Well, shifting back over to PEDs or performance enhancing drugs, I want to talk a little bit about like the good, the bad, and the ugly. Is there such a thing as conservative long-term PED use?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. For instance, I think that most men, even if they're staying below just TRT traditionally can go up to 200 milligrams per week. Yes, people are going to argue in the comments saying that I need to take more. Your free testosterone is way higher than a physiological norm at 200 milligrams. Almost everyone. There's like a rare genetic disorder where it won't be, but anything within that 200 milligram marker, you can basically say, hey, I'm dropping 50 milligrams of testosterone out. I'm adding in 50 milligrams of DECA, and you're probably going to have no real negative cardiovascular impact. When you start pushing up past 300 plus milligrams is when you start having negative downsides. But they are very well tolerated from a drug standpoint for a long duration of time if the dosing stays relatively moderate, like within technically you can legally script up to 500 milligrams of testosterone, and that might be a misspeak, but I'm almost 100% positive it's 500 milligrams per week of testosterone. We have studies pretty well documented up to 600 milligrams a week of testosterone, and that can actually be legally scripted. Same with DECA can be legally scripted, but that goes to show that you can run these drugs, and we have quite a lot of literature at this point, especially in the bodybuilding populace, on like where these downturns are. if someone is recreationally doing stuff, one, have a doctor supervising it, get gene testing done. Because every time that you ramp up anabolic processes, if you're at risk for cancer or tumors growth, it can speed up the rate of which you're growing. That's the issue, that double-edged sword is speeding up. You might be growing muscle tissue faster, but you also are ramping up other processes as well. So I find that 200 milligram marker or below is very, very safe. Moderate use, up to 500 milligrams, maybe 600 milligrams, and people can run it for extended periods of time without really usually seeing impact on labs. Yeah. Other people, they touch 300, they sniff 300 milligrams and it throws off their cholesterol profile. Their LDL, their bad cholesterol goes up through the roof.
Yeah. What about the good though? So there's a lot of folks that, maybe like, man, this all sounds terrible. I'm just good where I'm at. Fuck, I'll keep popping my pharmaceuticals and everything else. But there's also good that's associated with appropriate use. So what are some of the good things that, like, and we'll just stick with TRT, or testosterone replacement therapy. What's some of the good stuff that can actually impact the heart, or from a physiological level? What would one expect?
Last year, they just dropped the black box warning off of testosterone because they found that in high risk populations with heart disease, it reversed heart disease markers. That should tell you how safe testosterone is. So it actually reversed, especially in hypogonadal men, it reversed basically a lot of these negative lab markers that you were seeing. So you see mood improvements. You start breaking down dopamine a little bit faster. Estrogen levels will come up. So sometimes you even see an improvement in serotonin levels. You usually see sex life improving, so relationships improving. You tend to see confidence improving because the way you're carrying yourself is how you are supposed to be carrying yourself most of the times. Women and men, actually. Most people gain confidence. And I think that that is the biggest life-changing thing. The way that you carry yourself, the way that you articulate yourself, the way that you actually work in a day in the life is extremely important. And that's the biggest change, the life-changing stuff that I see from testosterone. And this isn't everyone. Not everyone's going to feel like a superhuman on it. But if you start taking testosterone, you get on a diet, you start training, your confidence, your life will completely flip around and change your perspective on life. And everything tends to get better.
Well, I don't think my wife listens to this, so I'm going to say this freely, but if she does, she may kill me. My wife, when she got her blood work done, and everything was immaculate for the most part. Some way, somehow, she actually utilizes carbohydrates better than most people. And with that, though, the one marker that was very eye-opening was she had like no free testosterone. And so it was recommended that she got in a very low dosage of TRT. Her next comment to me was, I don't want to grow a dick. And or an Adam's apple, which, can be, you're not going to grow a dick. But there is extremism that can be associated. But what about with women specifically, though? What benefits would they see if they had very, very low testosterone?
So God, the clinic space has been so bad lately with this, though, too. Because the issue with women is, one, there's not a ton of research on it. There is, but there isn't, right? So you have to read between the fine lines with a lot of the stuff. For women, it completely changes the game. Most women, I find most healthy women are between 20 nanogram per deciliter to up to 35 nanogram per deciliter testosterone. Women that are above that, 40 nanogram plus, I tend to see actually worse hormone profiles because it might be something like a PCOS, or just a woman leaning into androgen dominance from chronically being stressed and getting insulin resistance. So one thing I always look at from a side effect standpoint to avoid side effects with women is, are they insulin resistant? That's actually the first thing I want to knock down, because I know that they're going to be preferencing that anabolic bucket essentially from a how hormones are created standpoint. But low dosages of testosterone on a woman that has low testosterone increases bone density, increases libido, improves neurotransmitters in the brain. So dopamine and serotonin, dopamine to get stuff done, serotonin from a happiness standpoint. Those are a lot of the things that you start to see different. But I think the bone density one from a longevity standpoint is a huge one. Also, the interesting thing about taking very low dosages of testosterone is usually you're just adding into the bucket. So you're actually not causing much downregulation of natural hormone production. So you take a very low amount and still get a ton of benefits out of it and no real downsides.
Real talk. Most marketing problems aren't marketing problems. They're business problems wearing a marketing hat. Cute, but very expensive. Maybe you're getting traffic, but it's not converting. Maybe you're converting, but your average sale is too low. Maybe things are fine, but not scaling. That's usually a system issue, not a need a new ad issue. So here's the move. Let's hop on a short call, look at your business, and see what's really holding your growth back. No pressure, no pitch, just a fit check. If we can help, we'll tell you how. If we can't, we'll tell you that too. Tap learn more and grab a time.
Well, I want to talk about something that's become extremely prevalent in the last probably 12 to 18 months, which I don't know. I think there's a lot of gray around it, at least from what I can see in the circles that I run in. This idea of GLP-1s, GLP-3s. I remember, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe not even that long ago, you had all of these, and these are my words, and I might get hated on for this, but very outspoken, larger people that said, don't fat shame me, even though I look like this, my blood panels are great, I'm healthy, which I can tell you is a crock of shit. The body generally on the exterior does not lie. Those same folks are now the spokespeople for all these GLP-1s. So Ozempic and all this other bullshit that you see on TV. I want to lean into Ozempic, the GLP-1s. What is happening inside of people's body when they are taking this?
So I was talking about Pandora's box, and it was GLP-1s. They accidentally, they're trying to get as much money as they can right now. So they're over-scripting the drug, which we'll get into in a second. But Pandora's box, in the sense that this is going to reduce down the risk of disease long-term by so much if applied properly. And I said that this from day one. I was like, they're going to over-script these drugs. People are not going to eat, and you're going to see all these different issues coming up. Now, I didn't know that they didn't label some of the warnings on it, because that's all risk-benefit analysis. How much money are they going to make before they get sued, and how much money are they going to lose on a lawsuit? And that's the class action lawsuits that are going on with places like Ozempic right now. Eli Lilly, companies like that, they're all being sued right now because they scripted the drugs in such high amounts that people just stopped eating. It didn't actually have to do with the drug directly itself. The drug does several things directly to reduce that appetite. The two big ones are going to be the reduction in motility, so the movement of food through the body, which makes you signal, I'm full, I don't need to eat more food. So
it and then slows down gastric emptying?
Slows down gastric emptying, which is actually an issue with surgeries. Like, they didn't catch on to it initially. So anesthesiologists were like, hey, stop taking it 2 weeks before you come in here, kind of thing. So make sure if you have a surgery, you stop taking it 2 weeks prior. The other thing that you're having an issue with is, and this is really cool, was it directly impacts the brain and the reward system from food predominantly. However, it doesn't just do that. This is life-changing, actually, for certain people. They applied this to porn addicts, and it reduced down the need to watch porn. So it reduces down that dopamine drive, that hit that you get. So a sense of apathy, I think, becomes a thing with a lot of these people that are taking too much of it. And I love GLPs. It is Pandora's box in the sense that doing very low dosages of it reduces down blood glucose. It monitors blood glucose. So even if you're in a constant high stress state, it is so protective of the pancreas that you can secrete more insulin effectively. You can metabolize blood glucose more. Your inflammation stays lower. It reduces down the risk of autoimmune disease. It reduces down, it's so impressive what it does. If you had a bad day, you might not stress eat because it changed that reward system that you have. And that's why I like them. Now, the interesting thing is what they originally were starting to script dosing at was usually 0.5 milligrams per week. And they would titrate dosages up to over 2 milligrams, which the interesting thing is with obese populace, they went up to 2 milligrams or higher. And with diabetics, they usually stopped around like 1.2 milligrams or so, which I never really understood, because the drug's clearly effective for weight reduction, even at low dosages. What I found effective with the original GLP-1, so Ozempic and semaglutide, was 0.1 milligrams per week was effective for 98% of people I've seen it in. I have seen several people that needed 0.2, maximum 0.5 milligrams per week to get the results that they needed to out of it. One case was 0.5 milligrams. Everyone else was 0.25 milligrams or below. And then interesting thing is they switched over to the starting dose for a lot of these places were going to be 0.25 milligrams per week, but they would titrate dosages up. So increase dosing by 0.25 milligrams or 0.5 milligrams every 4 weeks or so.
Is there any truth to the idea, though, that there's muscle wasting that's also going on during the same time? Because I have heard that you just become a smaller version of what you already are.
Muscle wasting is a myth from it. It's because you're not eating food. It's because you're not training. It's because you're not doing anything.
So it's a byproduct.
It's a byproduct of not eating food. It should increase someone's ability to grow muscle tissue because you're more insulin sensitive. It increases growth hormone serum levels and IGF-1 from it as secondhand from it. Plus you're more efficient with insulin. So it increases again, that IGF-1 a little bit higher, which usually when you're trying to muscle build, like growth hormone is like the holy grail. Like we all want growth hormone and it does that. It's pretty well documented that it increases it. But just the ability to be able to shuttle glycogen into the muscle tissue should be able to make you grow muscle tissue easier. And I see it in practice over and over again that it improves it. When people do too much, though, I do see people tend to flatten out a little bit, or their waist. Actually, this is an interesting one because bodybuilding is so extreme. You see small waist. Doing too much GLP-1 because of the gastric emptying process and it's slowing down, I tend to see people's waist start getting wider. And I predicted that one also. And I started seeing it actually. Yeah. Very interesting.
So the reality is the downstream effect is that they're not eating as much. They don't have as much energy expenditure. And also they don't, because they're not getting enough protein and everything else, even if they did train, they're not seeing the benefit of it.
Yes, if you're taking too much, you physically can't get enough food in. That's why people are going to the ER because they couldn't eat any more food. They would like have to start like throwing up involuntarily. Like they couldn't get it, like their body was trying to get it out because they couldn't get it down.
Okay. So that, and then, more recently there's this, talk of the Holy Grail, which is retatrutide. What is the difference between retatrutide and Ozempic or GLP-1s?
Sure. So you had the first generation, which was just GLP-1s. That was semaglutide and Ozempic. Then you had to step up from there, which has actually been around for a really long time, which people never really talked about. It was tirzepatide, which is a GIP plus that GLP-1. So it's a GIP agonist. So that can help with a little bit of fatty oxidation. I'll talk about the big thing that made it an improvement, but it can help with like fatty oxidation, getting some fat in the bloodstream. So potentially some metabolic benefits behind it. Now, the real benefit with the tirzepatide, that second generation, was that it was 4 times more well tolerated than the first generation that came out. You see tirzepatide being dosed. So I'm just going to say 2.4 milligrams. I think that it can be 2.5 milligrams for the first generation scripted up to max. You can go up to 15 milligrams of tirzepatide. Now, the interesting thing is I see like the starting dose is 2.5 milligrams. I see that perfectly fine with nearly every single person, max 5 milligrams on tirzepatide from an effective standpoint for someone that can actually follow a diet and show up to train and things like that. I found for a lot of people that they actually prefer the first generation better just because it helped with appetite so much. So people that were wanting to be in fat loss states and a suppressed appetite was just so much more effective. The dosing was lower. It was also way cheaper than it was on the second generation, but still very effective the second generation. Now, the interesting thing, and I thought that tirzepatide was going to be more effective for controlling blood glucose than I thought retatrutide was. Retatrutide is the third one that's going to be released by Eli Lilly. In fact, phase 3 actually of research, the first study just released, and I did a video on it. The average weight loss, take a guess. What do you think the average weight loss on retatrutide was?
In what period of time?
Yeah, so it was 62 weeks. But on the original GLP-1s, just to put into perspective, usually the weight loss on the first generation was around like 15% to 18% weight reduction, right? Maybe you had some studies that were a little bit higher. And then the second generation was slightly higher, about 2% more approximately. So like 20%, 21%, maybe 22%.
30%?
30%? That was a good guess. 28.7%. The average weight was 72 pounds lost in 62 weeks. Now, I didn't have that research before I had like 500 case studies approximately on retatrutide. I had some people going from one-to-one conversions, milligram for milligram, from tirzepatide over to retatrutide. And then I also had some people going from the original GLPs, from semaglutide to retatrutide. What I found, now the third generation had the addition of glucagon agonist. So that again affects the liver and it allows like glucose to release into the bloodstream. Now that is more of a fail-safe. That's a metabolic adaptation that the body does to allow the body to utilize energy. In theory, could cause fat storage to an extent. In theory, it's taken by itself very differently than a fat loss state. Like you don't take a glucagon agonist to lose body fat. You use it to shuttle. And when you add that in the mix, I thought tirzepatide was going to be better for at least type 2 diabetes. Now, the glucagon agonist was added in there to help preserve muscle tissue in a fat reduction state. That was a whole theory behind it. What I saw next was quite different than I thought I was going to see. The 1-to-1 conversion of tirzepatide to retatrutide, milligram for milligram, which has less GLP-1 in it, was way more effective for reducing down blood glucose. What I found, if it was compounded properly, was the big issue in the space right now. If it was compounded properly, is about 1 milligram of retatrutide was equivalent to 2.5 milligrams of tirzepatide for controlling blood glucose, which makes almost zero sense, by the way. Like it's still, I understand it, and I've seen it so many times that I just have to accept it by this point, that it's that much more effective for blood glucose management. Muscle retention, which isn't a thing because you retain muscle tissue when you diet down to an extent. In fact, the first generations and second generations do just fine at doing it as long as dose stays low. It mainly has to do with glycogen in the muscle tissue. The muscle tissue stayed fuller. You don't see as much of a motility issue on the retatrutide as well because it's less GLP in it. So it's basically like a win-win. Also, the fat loss on it is way better than any of the other previous generations. Way more tolerated. It's like everything's just better. So the interesting thing, though, that no one's talking about, though, is the side effects with it. So the first generations, you had those gut issues, right? You had the gut issues. You're going to eventually start, there's probably going to be another class action lawsuit for hypothyroidism or something like that because they're eating such low amounts of food that they're probably going to start having hair loss and stuff like, and you're already seeing the bone marrow starting to reduce down. It's just because they're not eating food. On retatrutide, the major change is, I'm going to mispronounce this word. I always butcher it. It's dysesthesia, which is, I told you I was going to butcher it. It's almost like anesthesia, but with the DY in the front of it. It causes painful sensation to the skin. It almost feels like pins and needles going through your entire skin, which is, I experienced this on Graves. And that's why I have a theory around it, actually. And you actually saw in higher dosages, in the 8 milligram dose and the 12 milligram dose, you saw 15% approximately getting side effects. And also a lot of the people just stopped taking it. About 20% of people stopped taking it. But 15% about approximately got side effects, up to 17%. Now, that I believe that this is going on due to the fact that there are misfires in the nerves going on due to reduction in how much food they're eating. So maybe not enough food being added into the body. And then you have issues with fluid balance with water and sodium, because when you have glucose to shuttle glycogen, you need sodium. Sodium causes misfires. So that causes severe nerve pains. Like if you ever see a muscle spazzing, everyone's like, oh, it's lack of potassium, because most people have potassium deficiencies because we don't get a lot of potassium in our diet. It's usually lack of sodium, because a lot of athletes, they say hydrated, right? But if you're staying super hydrated and you're peeing out all your electrolytes, then you don't have enough sodium. And that's why my theory is around. It actually has to do with more of a sodium and electrolyte balance, and potentially not enough carbohydrates being added into the system. And that's causing misfires and pain to the touch. In fact, I just had someone that had only 5 milligrams in their system and they were having pain to the touch. I had another report. Actually, it was one of my friends that's local that used to live in the UK. His UK friend saw my video, I guess, and reached out. He's like, hey, does the pain ever stop subsiding? And the answer is, a lot of people do adjust to it. Not everyone, though.
Yeah. Are you, and it may be too early to tell at this point, but are you concerned at all about long-term effects? And then specifically to that, are we leveraging these drugs to outsource our discipline?
General populace, yes, they're outsourcing discipline. I hope that people learn the right tools. I really do hope that people actually start listening to the podcasts that are going on around the warnings around GLP-1s. I think that GLP-1 was Pandora's box in the sense that it can prevent disease long-term because it's so good from a health standpoint. It also ramps up anabolic processes. You have better release of insulin and things like that. But there's always a double-edged sword. It's like you drive up inflammation too much from training, and technically on paper that could cause like tumor or cancer risk long-term, but really, is it going to? No. This is kind of in the same boat where if you're doing it in a framework where it makes sense from a lifestyle perspective to keep inflammation low and to improve potentially, if you know you're going to lean into eating binge eat, to taking that noise canceling off the food, then I think it's a massive plus long term. I think it's going to elongate a lot of lives. I think it's going to prevent a lot of disease. The people that are using this in very high dosages, they're in a world of hurt and they're already there. And that's why there's class action lawsuits going on, and there might be more to come.
Yeah. No, good stuff. Well, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, and I want to touch on it briefly. Hormone clinics. Mm-hmm. How do you spot a hormone clinic that is in it for profit independency versus someone who's doing it the right way?
How much are they charging you for your drugs? Like they're glorified. Like a lot of these clinics, at least a few years ago, especially, they were like glorified drug dealers is what they were. Unfortunately, that's just me calling it how it is. I mean, it was like doctors were just signing it, like literally signing a script that they didn't even know what they were signing at. They just like user scribble on the paper. They're getting paid a couple grand a month and go on with your life, right? And but it was actually the clinic owners that were scripting the drugs, and then they were upselling the drugs. So it was legally drug dealing. And I wouldn't say it's just directly from cost, right? So clinics usually make money on several different fronts. There's different structures. I like concierge, like one positive, there's different models, but concierge service for people that don't have much of a money boundary is a better route to go, especially if you're going to try to biohack your way to heaven kind of thing. Well, not heaven, I'll to say on the planet as long as you can. Because the drugs hopefully are at cost where they're not making money off the drugs and they're not making money off the lab. Sometimes it becomes cheaper that way. There's a lot of these clinics that are charging minimum a 2 times multiplier on the labs and up to a 10 times multiplier on the drug itself. So that being said, if their model is incentivized to sell more drugs, just be cautious. And that's just my warning for you, because I know the prices to everything. I know the back end prices to everything. So that's where I would caution. The other thing is if there's like something new, popular on the market, and they start like, hey, like you should check this out, and it's like a couple grand a month kind of thing. Well, do they even have observational research for themselves directly, or were they sales pitched from someone that's selling the drug to sell the drug? Or did they show up to a lot of them are just like going to conferences now, and then they're like, oh, this cool new peptide's releasing. And there might not even be any human research on it yet, right? We don't even know if
we're the guinea pigs.
Or the guinea pigs. And that's fine to an extent. I mean, that's what bodybuilders are.
Yeah. So I mean, you talked about cost. So
red flags. Okay. Yeah, because this is what labs. A really common one that I see an issue with, like women in particular, is they don't run progesterone on women. Because it's a more expensive lab marker, I guess. It's not like super expensive either, but they don't run progesterone levels. So every single time you're running labs is minimum, labs should be getting run, especially if you're on hormones, every 6 months is the bare minimum. If you really want to look after your health, like every 3 months or so. If you're an enhanced athlete, that's what you should be doing. No progesterone with women being run, non-extensive lab panels. Diagnosis without a full lab panel on whatever they're diagnosing. Like I've seen some really interesting diagnoses for my clients. Sometimes it's very rare, but with clients, and I'm like, wait, how did they get that diagnosis? And there was no lab marker that was run for whatever that diagnosis is. So it almost seemed like a turn and burn kind of thing, where it's like, how many people can the doctor visit in a day kind of thing? And they're actually confusing different lab markers for maybe a previous patient that day, or a previous patient that's happening, or a patient that's happening later on in the day with them. So for men, again, I would warn people, like probably adding an APOB read, especially if enhancing, should be getting run if they're doing weird things like selling drugs, selling drugs that aren't FDA legal. I've seen Trend getting pushed through clinics. So that was underground lab producing whatever drugs they were probably buying from the entire clinic. There are non-FDA drugs. You can look up what is FDA approved and what isn't FDA approved. I caution people away from ChatGPT for a lot of stuff, but that's something that's actually great is if you get scripted a drug, you can always look it up on the internet. And if it's FDA approved, cool. If it's not FDA approved, you might want to start asking some questions. The peptide space is a little bit different. It's like a complete gray area right now. In fact, there was a there was an interim policy that made it so that compounding pharmacies could compound it, including the GLPs at one point in time. And then Big Pharma came back through. They're like, hey, stop.
Because they want to make all the money.
Yeah, exactly. Well, did they make money? They spent all the money on the research. And from a business standpoint, Big Pharmacy spent all the money going through the legal routes for the research and development of that drug. And that drug probably wouldn't exist without them doing that, whatever billions of dollars it cost them to do it. So they need to make their money back.
Yeah. So, last idea here to kind of wrap this up. Talk to me about biohacking. What does that really mean? And what should it really look like?
Biohacking should look like how not how fast can you run, how efficiently can you run for as long of a period of time as possible. And that's your life. So how long can you live? That's what biohacking is all about. So it should be a blend of Eastern medicine. It should be a blend of Western medicine and a little bit of the gray area added into the mix that we, from a mechanism standpoint, think might be a holy grail. What the biohacking space has turned into is really funny. People call themselves biohackers because they're chat GPTing peptides and they're reading rat research. And it's been very, very interesting in this space. Peptides may be a piece of biohacking, but it's not everything. Interpreting labs, looking for root causations to prevent disease, those are the big pieces of biohacking. Ways to hack yourself into getting back into a good circadian rhythm so you're sleeping, making sure that you're walking the walk, right? Like that confidence, I think, is a big piece of biohacking. It's really cool if you want to talk about brain health and biohacking. For these public speakers and stuff like that, some of the formulas that I put together to make sure that they're calm, cool, and collected, but they're hyper vigilant in what they're going to say and how they're going to present and how they're going to carry themselves. That also gets into the performance space of like what medications like steroids do they need to run to look a certain way, to present themselves in a certain way? Is there a Hollywood actor that needs to get ready for a film? How do they need to look? How do you also make sure that they can live as long as possible, right? And that's what biohacking is about. So performance in all areas of life, and how long can that person live?
Would it be fair to say that some folks are trying to play God?
There are definitely some people out there, but if you want to talk about playing God, then we could talk about cloning and stuff like that. So, I mean, like we're not far off of having the technology. In fact, we probably do have the technology already. Like I believe we've had it for probably about like 2 decades now, to clone a human. And then let's say that an organ fails, you get just transplant it back into yourself. You don't even have to worry about a donor or anything like that. And I believe the technology's already been there. So people trying to play God, definitely some people out there. I know I don't want to live forever. Yeah. I feel like that'd be depressing, watching a bunch of people passing away around you while you're living forever.
No kidding. That sounds like living in hell.
Yeah.
So, I mean, last question for you, and then we'll close this out. I mean, we've talked about, good, bad, and ugly, all the things in between. This has probably like raised more questions for people than they even had to start with. And this can be a shameless plug or whatever you want it to be. If somebody's curious about this and they want some real answers, okay, ChatGPT may not be the way to go. What would you recommend if somebody's curious?
So I do have my social media channels, which are obviously free. And I do have an education community, which is relatively affordable for most people to join into it, where they can get way more in-depth guides where I do break down some of the PubMeds and stuff like that, which is the clinical research. On the YouTube channels, for sure, I do very deep dives. And I do, like, for instance, the phase 3 retatrutide I just did a video on recently. I also talk about not just what does the data say, but what I observationally see, because I do have over a decade of experience doing this. I personally injected BPC 157 and TB 500 into my wrist when I tore my tendon and ligament over a decade ago. And people are like, oh, peptides didn't exist back then. I'm like, no, like, unfortunately, like we've known about it in the not only in this space, the bodybuilding space, but the pro performance space for a long time. They've been using it. So checking out the education channel or my social media is awesome. Plus my coaches are awesome and they do the same thing that I do. They do biohacking.
Well, we'll drop all of your social handles and whatnot in the show notes for everybody. But guys, there's nothing wrong with wanting to perform at a higher level, but somewhere along the way, high performance has become synonymous with chemical intervention. Biohacking used to mean understanding your biology. Now it often means overriding it. The scary part, you can feel incredible while damage accumulates silently. Muscle is visible, hormonal elevation is measurable, but long-term consequence is patient and sometimes instant. Whether you're a bodybuilder, a CEO, a parent, or someone just trying to keep up in a hyper-competitive world, ask better questions. Not just how do I perform more, but how long do I want to perform this way? Optimization without awareness is just experimentation, and your body isn't a beta test. David, thanks for bringing some honesty, some candor to this space, and I think it desperately needs it. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time, from Life by the Horns.